Mike studied the framed wedding photo on the wall of their home. He and Sandra were beaming with hope and love. That was 10 years ago. They had achieved everything they'd dreamed of. The large house in the desirable suburbs, 2 wonderful children, successful careers, and a wide circle of friends. But for several months, Mike had sensed something was wrong. Sandra spent increasingly more time on her smartphone, smiling mysteriously while reading messages, and constantly inventing new excuses for late meetings or gatherings with friends. Initially, he attributed it to the stress in both their lives. He tried to spend more time with her, surprised her with small gestures and tokens of love. Yet the distance between them continued to grow. Chance eventually led to the bitter truth. While resetting the children's old iPad, he discovered Sandra's messenger conversations were still stored there. What he read made his heart freeze. His wife had been living a double life for months with her childhood friend Mark. The messages were full of intimacy, shared secrets, and plans for meetings. Particularly painful were the passages where Sandra mocked him, sharing his weaknesses and private concerns with Mark. Mike felt as if the ground had been pulled from beneath his feet. That night, he lay awake beside his sleeping wife, staring at the ceiling. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Confrontation? Immediate separation? Or should he keep a cool head and proceed strategically? His first thought was of the children. Emma and Leon shouldn't suffer from a hasty emotional reaction. The more he thought about it, the clearer his plan became. He wouldn't be the typical betrayed victim acting on impulse. Instead, he would carefully plan every step. Sandra had perfected her double game. He would show her he could play it even better. The next morning, he went to work as usual, kissed her goodbye, and played the role of the unsuspecting husband. But internally, he had already flipped a switch. His feelings for Sandra transformed into cold calculation. He would take his time, gather evidence, and prepare everything. Only when the right moment came would he strike, precisely and devastatingly. The following weeks became an intricate chess game. While Sandra carelessly continued her double life, Mike systematically began his counter-project. He secretly set up new bank accounts and gradually transferred money into them. His first step led him to an experienced divorce lawyer, who provided valuable advice on how to optimally secure his position. Simultaneously, he meticulously documented every piece of evidence of Sandra's infidelity. He installed backup software on the iPad that saved all messages, even ones Sandra had long deleted. The conversations between her and Mark grew increasingly intimate, their meeting plans more detailed. Mike read along as his wife dismantled their shared life while he sat beside her, smiling. During this time, he focused particularly on the children. He took time off when they were sick, helped with homework, and organized weekend outings. Emma and Leon flourished under his attention, while Sandra was increasingly absent. He supported his colleagues on important projects, building a network of gratitude and favors. He knew he would need every bit of support he could get. In the evenings, when Sandra was once again out with the girls, he sat at his laptop planning his future. He researched child custody, alimony, and asset division. By now, he had his emotions well under control. The initial anger had given way to cold determination. Sometimes, when Sandra came home late at night and reached for him, he played the loving husband. He returned her kisses and pretended not to notice the unfamiliar scent on her skin. He stored each of these situations in his mind as additional motivation. His patience was severely tested when he discovered Sandra and Mark planning a romantic weekend. She tried to convince him she had booked a spa retreat with her girlfriends. Mike just nodded understandingly and even encouraged her to take this time for herself. In truth, this lie marked the starting point for the final phase of his plan. He had now gathered enough evidence. His financial preparations were complete. The children had developed a close bond with him. It was time for the decisive strike. The day of reckoning began like any other. Sandra cheerfully packed her spa bag and said goodbye with a quick kiss. Mike waited patiently until she had left the house. Then he set his plan in motion. First, he went to the bank and dissolved their joint accounts, fairly dividing the money into separate accounts. Then he printed out all the collected evidence, hundreds of pages of messenger conversations, photos, and timestamps of secret meetings. His hands didn't even tremble. In the early evening, he parked in front of the upscale hotel where Sandra and Mark had checked in. He waited in the lobby and called her phone. As expected, she didn't answer. So he approached the front desk and asked to be connected to Mark's room. The panic in Mark's voice was clearly audible when Mike threatened to call his wife. Less than 5 minutes later, Sandra rushed out of the elevator, her face a mixture of shock and shame. He led her to a quiet corner in the lobby. He let her hasty attempts at explanation bounce off him. Instead, he methodically presented his evidence and demands. The separation was non-negotiable, but he offered her a deal. If she agreed to a quick, amicable divorce on his terms, their affair would remain private. Otherwise, he would send the evidence to her family, friends, and work colleagues. Sandra broke down crying as she realized the magnitude of her actions. She begged for a second chance, but Mike remained firm. He had chosen the perfect moment. She was emotionally distraught and in a compromising situation. After an hour, she had signed all the documents: the separation agreement, the preliminary custody arrangement, the agreement to move out of their shared home. Everything went according to his plan. As he left the hotel, he felt a strange mixture of triumph and sadness. A chapter of his life had irrevocably ended, but he had maintained control over its ending. The months following the confrontation unfolded exactly as Mike had envisioned. Sandra moved out that same weekend, taking up residence in a small apartment nearby. The children were initially disturbed by the sudden separation, but Mike provided emotional stability. He was always there for them, listening, comforting, and creating new routines. Sandra was allowed regular visits with the children, but Mike remained their primary caregiver. In the eyes of the outside world, he was the strong, wounded husband who still wanted the best for his family despite everything. He arranged therapy sessions for the children and attended counseling himself, all carefully documented for the divorce proceedings. His reduced work hours allowed him to focus intensively on Emma and Leon's care. Sandra's generous support payments made this easily possible. She made several attempts at reconciliation, writing long letters of apology and begging for a second chance. Mike responded politely, but firmly declined. His emotional distance only made her more desperate. The divorce became final after a year. Mike was awarded the house and primary custody. Sandra had to content herself with weekend visitation rights. Her affair with Mark had long since ended. He had stayed with his wife. 2 years after the separation, Mike had reorganized his life. He enjoyed being single, occasionally dated other women, and focused on his role as a father. The children were his pride and joy and had adjusted well to the separation. Sandra, however, continued to struggle with the consequences of her decisions. Each time she picked up the children and entered her former home, she saw everything she had lost. Mike's revenge was perfect. He hadn't just won, he had triumphed. The carefully orchestrated destruction of their marriage had left him in control of everything that mattered, while Sandra was left to face the full weight of her choices. His methodical approach had ensured not just his victory, but his children's stability and his own emotional survival. In the end, the perfect facade she had shattered was replaced by his own masterfully crafted reality.